David Chen spent 4 years in Riyadh, leading a team of 200 engineers. Last month, he packed his office into a single cardboard box. He joined because they promised him the future, the largest economic transformation in human history. $1.3 trillion committed to building a new Saudi Arabia. But here is what the Saudi government desperately doesn't want you to discover. That $1.3 trillion has produced almost nothing. Every major target has been missed. Every timeline has been broken, and the evidence is now impossible to hide. In this video, I will expose the staggering gap between what Saudi Arabia promised and what it actually delivered. I will reveal how $1.3 trillion vanished into the desert sand, and I will show you the internal data that proves Vision 2030 is the most expensive broken promise in modern history. What happens when an entire nation's future is built on targets that were never achievable? Less than 48 hours ago, sources within the Saudi Finance Ministry confirmed what analysts have been warning for years. The numbers don't add up. They never did. The kingdom committed $1.3 trillion across more than 60 mega projects and economic initiatives under Vision 2030. That figure represents roughly 3 times Saudi Arabia's entire annual gross domestic product. And the return on that investment? The line promised 170 kilometers. They built 2.4. Jeddah Tower promised the world's tallest building. It hasn't moved in 7 years. Trojena promised a ski resort in the desert by 2026. The Asian Winter Games have already been relocated. Sindalah Island was supposed to welcome its first guests in 2024. It is still a construction site. Saudi Arabia's finance minister, Mohammed Al-Jadid, stood before the cameras in 2024 and said something remarkable. He admitted that some projects would be delayed, others would be scaled back, and some might be canceled entirely. A market correction driven by practical considerations. That is government speak for we spent $1.3 trillion and missed every single target we set. To understand how Saudi Arabia arrived at this moment, you need to understand the original promise. In April 2016, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman unveiled Vision 2030 to the world. The pitch was extraordinary. Transform the kingdom from an oil-dependent economy into a global hub for tourism, technology, entertainment, and investment. Build cities from nothing. Attract billions in foreign capital. Create millions of jobs for young Saudis. 63 major projects announced across the kingdom. From Red Sea resorts to entertainment cities to an entire new capital district in Riyadh. The scale was unprecedented, and the world bought it. Investment banks published glowing reports. Western consultants flooded into Riyadh. McKinsey alone reportedly earned over $1 billion advising on the transformation. But the promise has been broken, and the consequences are becoming impossible to ignore. Let's examine the evidence piece by piece, starting with what is perhaps the most visible failure, the mega projects. NEOM was announced as a $500 billion city of the future along the Red Sea coast. At its center, the line, a mirrored megastructure stretching 170 kilometers through the desert. 9 million residents, 0 cars, powered entirely by renewable energy. The promotional videos looked like science fiction, and that is exactly what they turned out to be. By late 2025, satellite imagery confirmed only 2.4 kilometers had any physical progress. That is 1.4% of the original plan. The revised target quietly dropped the resident count from 9 million to 300,000. The timeline pushed to around 2045. The Mukab Cube in Riyadh was quietly shelved. The Oxagon floating industrial city remains an untested concept with no construction timeline. Project after project, promise after promise, and the same result every time. And $50 billion had already been spent. Jeddah Tower was supposed to be the tallest building on Earth. Construction stalled in 2017. The crane at the top hasn't moved in 7 years. The developer faces billions in debt. Trojena, the desert ski resort, The 2029 Asian Winter Games quietly relocated after construction fell years behind. One senior construction manager who worked on multiple NEOM projects and asked to remain anonymous told me this. We knew within the first year that the timelines were fantasy. The engineering challenges alone would take decades. But nobody wanted to tell the Crown Prince his vision was impossible. So we kept building reports that said everything was on track while the desert stayed empty. But the mega projects are only part of the story. The economic transformation itself is failing. Vision 2030's central promise was economic diversification, reduced dependence on oil. By 2030, non-oil revenue was supposed to dominate. Instead, oil still accounts for roughly 62% of total government revenue as of 2025. The International Monetary Fund estimates Saudi Arabia needs oil at approximately $96 per barrel to balance its budget. It is currently trading near $65. Tourism was supposed to be the crown jewel. 100 million annual visits by 2030. By 2024, roughly 30 million. Most of them religious pilgrims. Saudization was supposed to put Saudi nationals into private sector jobs. Instead, private companies report that qualification gaps remain significant. The private sector jobs that Vision 2030 promised simply do not exist yet. Foreign direct investment was supposed to flood in. The Public Investment Fund committed hundreds of billions to attract international capital, but Bloomberg reported that FDI inflows remain a fraction of projected targets. The money simply isn't coming. One senior analyst at a major international investment bank, who covers the Gulf region, explained the problem. The numbers never made sense from a private investor's perspective. Saudi Arabia was asking the world to invest in projects with no proven revenue model and significant regulatory unpredictability. Most serious institutional investors ran their own models and quietly walked away. And then there is the cost that doesn't appear in any budget report. The human cost. An investigation by ITV News found that more than 21,000 workers had died or disappeared working on Vision 2030 projects. Workers from Nepal, India, Bangladesh, and Pakistan. Between 2016 and 2024, 74% of those deaths officially classified as natural causes. Workers in their 20s and 30s dying of natural causes in the desert heat. The Hawatat tribe was forcibly displaced from ancestral lands to make way for NEOM. Those who resisted faced arrest. Abdul Rahim al-Huwaiti publicly opposed the evictions. He was killed by Saudi security forces in 2020. One Pakistani engineer who worked at a NEOM subcontractor site for 14 months and recently returned home described what he witnessed. They took our phones on arrival, said it was for security. When colleagues collapsed from heat exhaustion, supervisors told us to keep working. One man from my village died 3 months in. They said cardiac arrest. He was 26. No heart condition. His family received nothing. So how did $1.3 trillion produce so little? Several factors are converging simultaneously. First, the original projections had no basis in engineering reality. Building a mirrored structure across 170 kilometers was never achievable within a decade. Second, oil prices collapsed below the break-even point. Saudi Arabia has been running budget deficits since 2020. Third, global investors refused to participate at the scale needed. The Public Investment Fund ended up funding most projects domestically. Fourth, the consulting firms that designed the strategy had every incentive to be optimistic. McKinsey and others earned billions while projecting outcomes analysts called unrealistic. Finally, questioning the Crown Prince's timeline was career-ending. Internal dissent was suppressed. Warning signs were buried. The evidence of failure isn't just in financial reports. It is everywhere online. LinkedIn has become a digital departure lounge for Vision 2030 consultants. Posts from former NEOM employees describing exits, have accumulated thousands of reactions. Reddit's Middle East forums have transformed from celebration spaces into archives, documenting broken promises. Concept renders versus satellite imagery threads regularly reach the front page. One thread by a Gulf-based economist, comparing delivery across 47 projects, went viral. Over 12 million views. YouTube channels documenting NEOM failures have collectively accumulated millions of views. The algorithm is feeding the skepticism that Saudi Arabia tried to suppress. International media coverage shifted dramatically. In 2017, 90% of NEOM coverage was positive. By 2025, the ratio reversed. The narrative has collapsed, and the public relations machine cannot keep up. Saudi Arabia spent an estimated $500 million on international lobbying and public relations in 2024 alone. It bought silence from some outlets, but it could not stop the truth spreading online. But Saudi Arabia has been actively suppressing coverage. Several journalists have privately acknowledged having stories rejected after pressure from Saudi lobbyists. Workers who leave are bound by non-disclosure agreements. Former executives describe reports rewritten to match the narrative leadership wanted. The consequences are cascading. Without the tourism revenue supposed to replace oil, the budget deficit is widening. The IMF projects Saudi Arabia will need to borrow over $26 billion in 2025 alone. Without private sector jobs, youth unemployment remains structural. Roughly 70% of citizens still work for the government, nearly unchanged since 2016. 60% of the Saudi population is under 30. They were promised a vibrant private sector economy. Instead, they compete for shrinking government positions. Consumer spending has softened. Retail vacancy rates in Riyadh have climbed. The domestic economy, supposed to boom alongside the mega projects, is showing cracks. The social contract was simple. Oil wealth funds public services. Vision 2030 was supposed to replace that contract. It has not. The public investment fund has absorbed massive domestic losses. Bloomberg reported Saudi-focused investments significantly underperformed international holdings. Other Gulf states are reassessing. The UAE has distanced itself from Saudi-scale ambitions. Qatar shifted toward smaller, proven investments. What does Saudi Arabia's leadership know that they aren't saying publicly? Finding solutions requires acknowledging an uncomfortable truth. Saudi Arabia bet its post-oil future on a strategy designed by foreign consultants with every incentive to overpromise. The kingdom is now quietly pivoting. Internal documents suggest a shift toward AI infrastructure and data centers, projects that are smaller and proven. To be fair, some progress exists. Female workforce participation rose from 17% to over 30%. Entertainment venues opened. Non-religious tourism is growing, but the scorecard is brutal. 3 modest social wins against dozens of missed economic and infrastructure targets. But these modest gains came at $1.3 trillion, an investment-to-return ratio that would bankrupt any private enterprise on Earth. The window for course correction is narrowing. Oil revenues declining, energy transition accelerating. Every year erodes the credibility the kingdom needs. Saudi Arabia's leadership sold the world a vision of a post-oil future. $1.3 trillion later, the oil still flows and the desert is still empty. The workers who built the foundations are dying in the thousands. The tribes who lived on the land were displaced or killed. The consultants collected their fees and left. You were told this was the future. You were sold the most expensive broken promise in history. Your perspective matters more than any government press release. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe if you want the truth about what is really happening, and this is just the spending. Wait until you see what they're doing to hide the audit.